Chapter 5, Freedom of Expression. This is Part 4 of 4, Hate Speech and Pornography. The learning outcomes include: define hate speech and evaluate what freedom of expression rights may apply. Define pornography. Explain child pornography and penalties associated with violations. Evaluate spam in the context of freedom of expression. Hate speech is a term you've probably heard before. In the U.S., it's somewhat difficult to define hate speech because we do allow freedom of expression, freedom of speech. Hate speech has to be something persistent, malicious, harassing, aimed at a particular person because of their gender, their sexual orientation, their race, whatever it might be. While the U.S. government does have to follow the First Amendment, internet service providers and hosts such as Facebook, YouTube, all your social media sites, they can remove content that does not meet their standards, whatever their standards are. Public schools and universities, being agents of the government, follow First Amendment, although you're still going to have codes of conduct that you have to follow, much like you have to follow here at KSU. If you happen to be a U.S. citizen and you post material on a foreign website that's illegal there, say pornography, where it's illegal in many countries, many Middle Eastern countries we hear about, and you might be prosecuted if you go to their jurisdiction or if it's a grievous enough offense if the U.S. allows you to be extradited. Pornography means different things to different people. Obviously, it's a very difficult concept to define. As we discussed earlier, their justice said, I don't know what it is, but I'll know it when I see it. Pornography is not illegal for those that are of age. The courts can't agree what even pornography is and whether they should use local, county, state, city, regional, national community standards. Then comes the problem of defining those community standards, and there's never complete consensus within a community or a group. The groups we belong to, we all belong to multiple tribes. We belong to people based on where we go to school, where we work, who we are, who our family is, our culture, etc. We belong to many different groups or tribes. The standards among those groups may not be consistent. Within an organization, companies have to take reasonable steps to prevent pornography if it's explicitly outlined in their code of conduct. So they need to establish an acceptable use policy that says you can't do this or you can do this. There are times people are doing research on pornography and they may need to visit sites. There could be health department reasons for visiting, trying to get pornography actors that have a sexually transmitted disease and you're trying to stop the spread of it. So there could be valid reasons, but they have to be clearly outlined. Those that violate the policy must then be punished in some way. A law without any enforcement or any repercussions is no good. And companies can set their own acceptable use guidelines. When children are involved, the penalties are high. Possession of child pornography is a federal crime and is punishable by up to 5 years in prison per incident. Some states require those who repair or maintain computers to turn in customers who have child pornography on their computers. If they don't turn in the customers, they could face penalties for conspiracy and/or possession of child pornography. This is one area where the government is clear across all party lines. Child pornography is illegal and will be punished. There are some gray areas. What if someone takes a legal pornographic movie and puts a child's face on an adult's body? Is it child porn or digital manipulation of legal images that isn't illegal? And what if a 15-year-old girl and a 16-year-old boy engage in sexual activity? Is that illegal? The age of consent is 16 in the state of Georgia. Or does the law protect teens in that situation through its Romeo and Juliet exception, at least in the state of Georgia? Time will tell how these issues are handled. Sexting presents interesting challenges. Sexting between adults is perfectly legal. I advise you not to do it, however. Once you share with another person, you have no further expectations of privacy. But what if it's a 15-year-old boy and a 16-year-old girl sexting? Should those situations be treated differently? Or what if a 15-year-old child sends a 16-year-old child a picture exposing private parts? Will they both be prosecuted for distribution and possession of child pornography? A few years ago, a Metro Atlanta school had an issue with child pornography and sexting. Rumor got around that a 15-year-old young lady was going to perform a sexual act on her 16-year-old boyfriend. Well, guess what all the students did? What is attached to them at all times? Their phones. So they videotaped it on their phones. Oops, they now all have child pornography on their phone. And if they shared with someone or posted online, they have now distributed child pornography. To complicate matters, some of them were 18 years old. In the end, the FBI was involved and they traced every copy of the sexual act online and removed it to the best of their ability. The students were disciplined through the school and not through law enforcement. Moral of this story: educate your kids, and they need to use care and discretion with anything they share, particularly if they share with someone else. Remember, if you share with others, you have no expectation of privacy. You can take a look at this YouTube video on the future of internet privacy for some more information. Let's look at trespass to chattel, a claim that has been extended to the digital world. Chattel is something you own. The argument is that you have the right to the entirety of your property. For instance, if your ranch overlaps with your neighbor's ranch, you may not want his cows to eat your grass, even if they only eat a small amount. It's your property that you could use, and even if it's a small portion, your neighbor doesn't have permission. Similarly, spammers don't have your consent to use your site to distribute numerous emails without your permission. They didn't have permission to use the company's network or bandwidth. Some harm resulted. Your emails don't reflect company culture, or your batch updates and maintenance were slowed slightly, and the spammer intended to harm your brand or your network or whatever it might be. The key elements of trespass to chattel are lack of consent, actual harm, and intent. In the past, courts have generally sided with the organization's right to use their electronic assets as they see fit. Spammers can't come on your website and send mass email messages. Competitors can't come on your site and acquire proprietary information, and data gatherers may not be allowed to use your site for comparison purposes. For instance, if you are a travel agent, you may not allow Google or other aggregators to come and gather information on your website using spiders or crawlers or the like, and then present it in a summary format with others. Sites like eBay have been somewhat successful at blocking data aggregators from their sites. If they use spiders, it likely violates the terms of use that was agreed upon. You know, the box where you clicked I agree without reading. It's important to understand, though, that some harm must be present for a claim to be successful. Well, Intel tried this when a former employee sent some critical email letters to other employees over their system after he was let go. My advice to Intel would be make sure he doesn't have access to the system. It was very small content, but Intel found it very offensive. There may have been employees that reacted in a negative manner towards Intel after that. The court determined that these damages aren't relevant to action for trespass, which depends on harms to the chattel or its availability. So if 1 million bots are going out to Ticketmaster and trying to grab its prices all the time, all day, then it may be a problem. If one bot does it one day, it's probably not a problem. That's how it was interpreted here. There are some federal laws that are relevant here. The computer fraud. Summarizing this chapter, First Amendment does give us the right to freedom of speech, a free press, freedom of religion, but our freedom of speech does have limitations. It does not necessarily protect obscene speech, however that's defined, defamation, where you harm someone else, and hate speech, however that is defined. Federal laws across the board prohibit child pornography, defamation, hate speech, and spam that goes against the guidelines established by the organization or internet service provider. Federal laws do prohibit some forms of anonymous communication, or you may find yourself under greater scrutiny if you encrypt everything. If you encrypt everything, hopefully they won't find you. Laws are different across the world. If you go to another country, you are subject to their laws. If someone comes to our country, if they're not a citizen, they don't have the same rights that American citizens have. However, it's usually extended to them if they're in this country. They usually have more freedoms than they would have in their home country, depending on where they're from. There are some countries elsewhere that give more freedom of speech opportunities. As an IT manager or an IT worker, and I contend all of you will be IT workers at some point, you'll use technology to accomplish your goals. There need to be very clear establishment of acceptable use policies. These policies need to be measured, assessed to see if people are following them, and if people are not following them, there needs to be some sort of action, repercussion, punishment, depending on the situation. Of course, organizations have to make an extra effort to ensure that their employees follow federal laws, company guidelines. You don't want to have anyone possibly sexually harassed. But the company needs a clear, acceptable use policy. KSU has a really good one. Your organization probably does as well. I encourage you to look at those because you signed and agreed to them, or you clicked and agreed to them at some point in the past. It's good to know what you signed or what you agreed to follow. They're not a be-all and end-all, but they are one place that you can try to ensure your employees are behaving as you want them to behave.